I need to speak to you directly before I tell you what happened, because once I believed something that almost destroyed someone I loved. I believed patience was protection. I believed that if my auntie stayed calm, stayed quiet, stayed dignified, the world and our family would eventually respect her. I believed silence would shield her. I was wrong. It started at a family gathering that was supposed to feel safe. The house was full, lights warm, music low, plates clinking, laughter floating through the room. But that laughter wasn't gentle. It was sharp, predatory, the kind that circles before it strikes. I remember watching faces more than hearing voices, noticing how eyes lingered too long on my auntie, how smiles curled at the edges like they were waiting for permission to cut. She stood near the dining table, calm as always, hands folded, posture steady, and then it happened. One relative, someone who always enjoyed an audience, laughed a little too loudly and said, "So what exactly do you contribute anymore?" The words landed hard. Then came the follow-up, softer, but crueler. Questions about her intelligence, her usefulness, her place in the family. Each sentence wrapped in fake curiosity, each one designed to humiliate her without sounding openly cruel. The room went silent, not the respectful kind, the testing kind. Every conversation stopped, every fork paused mid-air. Everyone turned to watch her face like judges waiting for a verdict. Would she snap? Would she cry? Would she defend herself? I felt my chest tighten as seconds stretched. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an exam, and everyone was watching to see if she would fail. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't even look offended. She simply smiled, thanked them for their concern, and said she was content with her choices. That was it. Calm, controlled, graceful. And that's when I realized how dangerous calm can look in the wrong room. Because the moment she didn't fight back, I saw it in their faces. Satisfaction. They mistook her composure for weakness. Later that night, as people moved into smaller groups, the whispers started. I heard them when I passed the hallway. Quiet laughs. Her name spoken like a joke. Someone said she had lost her edge. Someone else said she was too soft to matter anymore. Each word hit me harder than the insults thrown to her face. These weren't careless comments. They were conclusions. There was one insult I will never forget. One voice, low and smug, said, "She's lucky we still tolerate her." Tolerate. That word burned into my memory. It crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I felt my hands curl into fists, my heart pounding, waiting for her to hear it too. And she did. I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened for half a second before she smoothed herself out again. I stood there, frozen, watching, helpless. Every instinct in me screamed to step in, to defend her, to say something sharp enough to shut them all down. But I didn't. I stayed silent, just like she did. And the guilt of that silence still sits heavy in my chest. That night, as we drove home, she said nothing about what happened. Not a word. She stared out the window, city lights reflecting in her eyes, face unreadable. I wanted to ask if she was okay. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up, but something in her stillness stopped me. It felt deliberate, like she was already somewhere else, processing something deeper than pain. That was the first test. At least that's how everyone else saw it. They thought she had been measured and found lacking. They thought her quiet meant defeat. What I didn't understand yet was that this wasn't a one-time humiliation. It was the beginning of a pattern. Looking back now, I see it clearly. That gathering wasn't an accident. It was a signal, an invitation for them to push further. And once they realized she wouldn't react the way they expected, they felt emboldened. Humiliation became routine, disrespect became casual, and patience, her patience, became something they thought they could exploit. That night taught me something I wish I had understood sooner. Silence doesn't always end cruelty. Sometimes it teaches people how far they can go. Before anyone dared to underestimate my auntie, before they reduced her patience to a punchline, she was someone else entirely. I need you to understand that first, because the woman they mocked was not born quiet. She became that way. There was a time when her presence filled a room without effort. She had ambition that burned hot and steady, the kind that made plans feel inevitable. She was building a career she loved, one that challenged her, one that gave her a sense of identity beyond family roles and expectations. But when responsibility called, she answered without hesitation. She paused her work, not because she lacked talent, but because someone had to step up. Someone always did, and that someone was her. She postponed dreams with the calm lie of later. Later when things settle. Later when everyone else is okay. Later when there's less need. But later kept moving further away, and she never complained. She absorbed the sacrifice quietly, telling herself that being reliable mattered more than being fulfilled. The cost of that responsibility didn't show up all at once. It crept in slowly. Every time she put someone else first, she pushed herself further back. She became the one everyone depended on, the one who solved problems, smoothed conflicts, filled gaps without being asked, and the more dependable she became, the more invisible her needs grew. She learned early that speaking up disrupted peace, so she learned to stay quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood the price of saying it. Every disagreement was framed as her being difficult. Every boundary was treated like betrayal. Silence became survival. Calm became armor. I remember a moment from my childhood that still stands out. I had messed up badly, broken something valuable, and panic had taken over the house. Voices were raised. Blame was flying. She didn't yell. She didn't rush. She knelt down in front of me, met my eyes, and told me to breathe. Then she fixed what could be fixed, accepted what couldn't, and handled the consequences without drama. That was her strength, controlled, disciplined, unshakable. But that strength wasn't forged in comfort. It came from betrayal, from trusting people who later turned their backs, from offering loyalty that wasn't returned. She learned the hard way that not everyone who smiles at you is on your side. Each disappointment taught her restraint. Each broken promise taught her to observe instead of react. Over time, she became the emotional backbone of the family. When someone cried, they called her. When something fell apart, they leaned on her. She carried everyone else's stress while quietly setting her own aside. She was the steady ground beneath everyone's chaos, and somehow that reliability became expected instead of appreciated. What no one saw was the pain she kept locked away. The nights she lay awake, replaying conversations she never finished. The frustration of being needed but never truly seen. The grief of watching her own life stay on hold while everyone else moved forward. She never spoke about that pain openly. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want to burden anyone. So she carried it alone. Once, late at night, when I was old enough to notice the weight she carried, she said something to me I didn't fully understand at the time. She said, "Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were serious, like she was speaking from experience, not theory. Now I understand why she never reacted the way others expected. Her restraint wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was the result of years of learning when to speak, when to wait, and when to let people reveal themselves. Every wound she carried had taught her patience. Every betrayal had sharpened her awareness. They thought they were testing her strength. They didn't realize she had been tested long before they ever opened their mouths. After that first humiliation, something shifted in the family. It was subtle at first, almost polite, but I felt it immediately. They started watching her more closely, like they had discovered a weakness they wanted to measure again. One test wasn't enough. They needed confirmation, so they pushed harder. The next time it happened, it wasn't accidental or disguised as concern. It was public, loud, calculated. We were all gathered again, and a decision she had made, practical, thoughtful, responsible, was dragged into the open and torn apart for entertainment. Someone laughed and said, "Well, that's what happens when you let her decide." The room reacted with smirks instead of shock. No one corrected it. No one defended her. Eta. They began crossing lines with confidence, interrupting her, dismissing her opinions mid-sentence, making jokes at her expense, and watching to see if she'd finally snap. They expected nothing to happen, and when nothing did, they grew bolder. Boundaries became challenges. Respect became optional. Then came the financial pressure. Quiet, strategic, requests disguised as obligations, favors that weren't really favors, money she was expected to contribute without question, without discussion. When she hesitated even slightly, the guilt followed. After everything we've done for you, they used gratitude like a leash, tightening it just enough to remind her of her place. Soon, conversations started happening without her. Decisions were made in rooms she wasn't invited into. Plans finalized before she even knew they existed. I noticed it when people suddenly spoke around her instead of to her, referencing discussions she had never been part of. Exclusion wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. One moment still plays on repeat in my mind. A mistake was made, an expensive one, and before anyone could even process what happened, fingers turned toward her. Accusations flew, voices overlapped. She was blamed for something she had warned them about in advance. I waited for her to finally defend herself, to raise her voice, to fight back. She didn't. She stood there steady, absorbing every accusation like she was made of stone. I watched insult after insult land on her without resistance. I saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes hardened just slightly before softening again. She didn't argue, she didn't beg, she didn't explain, and that silence once again fed them. They took it as confirmation that they were right. Soon, rumors followed, quiet at first, then bolder. People started questioning her competence, suggesting she wasn't as capable as everyone thought, rewriting history to make her look unreliable. Each lie stacked on top of the last, and no one bothered to check the truth. Inside me, something started to burn. Anger, confusion, frustration. I couldn't understand how she could let this happen. I wanted her to fight. I wanted her to shut them down. Every time she stayed calm, it felt like watching someone step closer to the edge without looking down. But beneath that calm, I sensed something else. A tension that didn't belong to fear, a stillness that felt too controlled, too deliberate. It was like watching the surface of a lake just before a storm breaks, quiet, reflective, and hiding something powerful underneath. And that's when I realized this wasn't weakness anymore. It was pressure. And pressure, when it builds for too long, doesn't disappear. It explodes. The phone rang long after midnight, the kind of call that pulls you out of sleep with your heart already racing. I knew something was wrong before I even answered. Her name on the screen felt heavier than usual. When I said hello, she didn't apologize for the hour. She didn't ease into the conversation. She just said my name once, calmly, and asked if I was alone. That's when I knew this wasn't about pain anymore. This was about resolve. Her voice was steady, controlled, stripped of emotion in a way that felt intentional. She told me she was done enduring, not angry, not broken, done. Then she told me the truth she had been hiding for years. She said she had always known what they were doing, every insult masked as humor, every lie disguised as concern, every manipulation wrapped in family obligation. None of it had gone unnoticed. She told me she had been documenting everything: dates, messages, financial requests, contradictions, conversations she wasn't invited to but later heard about. She kept records of who said what, when they said it, and who was present. Emails saved, texts archived, notes written immediately after confrontations while the details were still sharp. What I thought was silence was evidence gathering. I remember sitting up in bed, suddenly wide awake, my breath shallow as the weight of it hit me. All those moments I thought she was being passive, she was preparing. All those times I wanted her to fight back. She was choosing timing over reaction. Her calm wasn't surrender, it was strategy. She told me there had been a moment earlier that day, a small comment, A casual dismissal, something insignificant on the surface, but it was the final confirmation she needed. That was when she decided she was finished absorbing damage. She said, "I'm not explaining myself anymore. I'm acting." I could hear it in her body before she even described it. Her posture had changed. Her voice carried weight now, not restraint. The softness that once smoothed over conflict was gone, replaced by precision. She wasn't emotional. She was focused. She told me she had already spoken to a lawyer quietly, not dramatically, not threateningly, just professionally. She shared everything she had collected, laid it out cleanly, clearly, without exaggeration. She didn't ask what she could do to hurt them. She asked what she could do to protect herself and hold them accountable. Then she revealed the leverage, financial entanglements they assumed she didn't understand, agreements they thought she had forgotten, decisions made in her name without consent. Money moved in ways that left trails, promises broken that carried consequences. She had been building this quietly for years, brick by brick, while they laughed and underestimated her. As she spoke, there was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt, just certainty, the kind that doesn't need validation. She wasn't asking for my approval. She was informing me, letting me know the storm was coming and she was the one controlling it. When the call ended, I sat there in the dark, stunned. All those tests they thought they were giving her, all those moments they believed proved her weakness. I finally understood the truth. She was never being tested. They were. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom or behind closed doors. It happened exactly where they felt safest. A familiar room, familiar faces, a gathering where they expected her to sit quietly, nod politely, and absorb whatever tone they decided to use that day. I could feel their confidence when we walked in. They assumed this was just another meeting where she would listen while they spoke over her. She let them talk first. They filled the air with opinions, complaints, half-truths. Voices overlapped. Accusations slipped in casually, like they were facts everyone already agreed on. I watched them glance at her, waiting for the usual response. The calm smile, the silence, the retreat. Instead, she leaned forward. Not dramatically, not angrily, just enough to shift the balance of the room. Her voice was steady when she spoke. Clear, unapologetic. "Before this goes any further," she said, "I need to correct a few things." The room hesitated. People exchanged looks. No one interrupted her. That alone was new. She took control of the conversation without raising her voice, without asking permission. She didn't rush. She didn't explain herself emotionally. She presented facts, slowly, methodically, one point at a time. Each sentence landed with intention. Then she began showing them what they never thought she had. Messages, dates, records, screenshots, documents. She didn't dump everything at once. She revealed it piece by piece, allowing each truth to sink in before moving to the next. Every insult that had been denied, every lie that had been rewritten, every manipulation that had been disguised as concern. The room changed. I watched confidence drain from faces that had once smirked. Laughter died mid-breath. Someone tried to interrupt her, but she didn't stop. She didn't need to. The truth had momentum now. The power dynamic flipped so cleanly it felt surgical. She exposed lies publicly, not by accusing, but by letting their own words contradict themselves. She quoted them accurately, replayed moments they insisted never happened, showed how stories changed depending on who was listening. There was no arguing with evidence that solid. Then came the consequences. Immediate. Financial obligations clarified, legal boundaries stated plainly, responsibilities reassigned. She wasn't threatening, she was informing. She explained what would happen next, what had already been set in motion, and what options were no longer available to them. I studied their faces. One person went pale. Another stared at the table like it might open up and swallow them. Someone who used to speak the loudest couldn't meet her eyes anymore. The realization moved through the room like a slow wave. They hadn't just misjudged her, they had exposed themselves. When she finished, she paused. Just long enough. Then she said the words that reframed everything. You thought my silence meant I didn't understand what you were doing. It meant I was paying attention. You thought my patience made me small. It gave me time. And you thought you were testing me. You weren't. No anger, no shouting, just clarity. The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable, absolute. No one rushed to fill it. No one laughed. No one argued. For the first time, there was nothing left to say. Justice didn't arrive loudly. It didn't need to. It was undeniable. And once it settled into that room, it stayed. Irreversible. Everything changed overnight. The same people who once spoke over her suddenly measured every word. Conversations softened. Invitations became careful. The dynamic that had ruled the family for years collapsed in a single evening. Power didn't shift slowly. It snapped into place. Where she once stood quietly on the edge, there was now distance around her, like no one dared step too close without permission. Some apologized, not dramatically, not with tears, quiet acknowledgments, avoided eye contact paired with forced sincerity. I didn't realize, one said. Another muttered, things got out of hand. And then there were the others, the loudest ones, who simply vanished. Calls stopped, messages went unanswered. They disappeared the moment accountability arrived, proving silence had always been their shield, too. For the first time since I'd known her, I saw something break loose inside my auntie. Not anger, relief. Years of restraint released in a single exhale. Her shoulders dropped, her breath slowed. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She waited until it was just us, then let the weight finally fall away. It wasn't dramatic, it was human. Her reputation corrected itself without her chasing it. Facts did the work. The same people who once questioned her competence now repeated her words carefully, crediting her openly. Stories were retold accurately. Lies lost their grip. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It stood on its own. After the chaos settled, there was quiet. Real quiet. Not the tense silence she used to live in, but peace. The kind that doesn't demand performance. Mornings felt lighter. Conversations felt cleaner. There was no longer a need to anticipate disrespect or brace for dismissal. The storm had passed and the air was clear. One night, she and I sat together, just talking. She told me something I'll never forget. She said patience had protected her for a long time, but it had also cost her pieces of herself. Waiting isn't the same as healing, she said, and endurance doesn't mean you owe anyone access to you. Boundaries replaced compliance. She no longer explained herself endlessly. She no longer said yes out of habit. When something didn't feel right, she said no, calmly, final, and people listened. Not because she demanded respect, but because she had taught them the cost of ignoring it. The respect she received now was different, quieter, genuine, no more jokes, no more tests, no more assumptions. She was seen clearly, and that visibility changed everything. Watching all of this rewired my understanding of strength. Strength wasn't loud, it wasn't reactive, it wasn't proven in arguments. It was built patiently, protected carefully, and released only when it could no longer be denied. And now she lives freely, not to impress, not to justify, not to earn approval. She lives because she finally understands she never needed permission in the first place. If you've ever been tested by the people closest to you, I need you to listen carefully. Not tested by strangers, but by family. By those who know your history, your wounds, your soft spots, the kind of testing that hides behind jokes, expectations, and silence, the kind that assumes you won't push back because you never have before. What I learned watching my auntie is this: silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. Sometimes it's the space where strength is sharpening itself, waiting for the moment it can no longer be ignored. Quiet doesn't mean unaware. Calm doesn't mean incapable. Endurance doesn't mean surrender. Surviving disrespect while you gather clarity is not the same as accepting it forever. You can endure without giving up your power. You can wait without losing your worth. Patience is not permission. Here's the truth no one tells you. Tests don't reveal the tested. They expose the tester. Every time someone pushes your boundaries to see how much you'll tolerate, they're showing you exactly who they are. And when the moment comes to respond, it's not about proving yourself, it's about letting their behavior speak for itself. My auntie taught me that timing is power. Acting too early gives people excuses. Acting too late gives them comfort. But acting when the truth is undeniable changes everything. She didn't rush, she didn't react. She waited until her strength could land cleanly and leave no room for denial. So if you're quiet right now, don't confuse that with being small. Pay attention to what you're learning. Pay attention to patterns. There is a difference between being silent because you're afraid and being silent because you're building. Also, justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives calmly with receipts, boundaries, and consequences that don't need shouting. Sometimes the strongest moments are the ones that don't ask for applause. I want you to think about who underestimates you, not with anger, but with clarity. Who assumes you'll always stay in the same place? Who mistakes your patience for permission? Who believes your silence means you don't see what's happening? Take this with you. Resilience is not about how much pain you can endure. It's about how deeply you respect yourself when it matters most. You don't need to announce your strength. You don't need to explain your boundaries. You don't need approval to step into your power. If this story spoke to you, carry it forward, not as rage, but as resolve. Know your timing, protect your dignity. And remember, the quietest people are often the ones no one should ever underestimate.